I'm Adélie Pojzman-Pontay, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today we dive into Donald Trump's campaign of revenge against CIA officials and into new and upcoming sanctions against Russia as pressure continues to mount following the drone incursion into the Polish airspace. And finally, we hear the second part of David Knowles' work on the fight against corruption in Ukraine, with two interviews that he recorded shortly before his death.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Friday, the 12th of September. 3 years and 202 days since the full-scale invasion began. Today, I'm joined by my colleague Dom Nicholls, Associate Editor for Defence.
So let's carry on with the main story of the week, really, that drone incursion into Poland and the response from there, which, as I said yesterday, is that real nexus between the military and the political, so that's why we're leading on it. The response from European countries to Tuesday's attack carries on. So yesterday evening, Polish officials gave an update on that drone incursion. Poland's Ministry of Internal Affairs said 17 drones had been found throughout eastern and northern Poland. The air traffic operations in eastern Poland along the borders with Ukraine and Belarus are going to be restricted until December the 9th. That's basically a thin sliver of land, if you like. I'm not quite sure how deep it is. I've just seen it on a map, which didn't have a key, or a North Pointer. God, who put that together? Anyway, but it's a thin sliver of land along the border that Poland has with Belarus, running down to the border that Poland has with Ukraine. There's going to be restrictions in there for civilian flights, special access for military flights, different restrictions by day and night, etc., etc. But an increased response to what happened the other night. Also, 40,000 Polish troops are going to be pushed up to the border with Belarus. That's partly because of the heightened tensions. I imagine that they'll have lots of anti-drone stuff with them, but also because of the upcoming Russia-Belarus Zapad 2025 joint military exercises, which start today. Now, the Institute for the Study of War also report Latvian Defence Minister Andris Spruds as saying that Latvia is going to close its airspace along its eastern border with Belarus and Russia until at least September the 18th. Then also yesterday, the German Defence Ministry said it was going to double the number of Eurofighter jets it currently deploys to defend Polish airspace. I mean, they're doubling it from 2 to 4. So, 4 Eurofighters, still good, but it's not a great multiple. But anyway, 2 to 4 German Eurofighters now going to be deployed to Poland. Germany is also going to extend its deployment of a rapid response air squadron at the Lager Air Base that handles Polish air defence missions. That has been extended up to the end of the year, December 31st. Netherlands is going to send air defence systems, artillery and 300 troops. And the Czech Republic is going to send 3 171SH helicopters and 100 soldiers. That aircraft is basically a modern HIP, the Mi-8 HIP, the Stalwart. It's been updated, Mi-17. The 171SH is another variant of it, but a big troop-carrying aircraft. Sweden is sending what they say is an urgent dispatch of further aid to Poland, including air defence systems and aircraft. That comes from Poland's defence minister. And France is going to be deploying 3 fighter jets to help protect Polish airspace, we are told. Now, Russia has urged Poland to reopen its border with Belarus that was closed a few days ago. Belarus has called the closure destructive and warned of consequences. That was closed ahead of the Zapad 2025 war games. I'm not sure the exact sequence, whether or not it was announced before the incursion or after, and they're saying Zapad, but it's all regressing, basically. We're going back to Iron Curtains and things like that. Now, related but not obviously directly as a result of the incursion, the Czech army, or the Czech Republic, has announced that the army is going to buy 44 Leopard 2A8 variant tanks. The purchase starting in 2028. They've got an option on another 12. And also announced today, the British government has imposed 100 fresh sanctions on Russia to try and increase pressure on Putin. These apparently are going to be targeting ships carrying oil, the Shadow Fleet, as well as companies and individuals supplying electronics, chemicals and explosives for weapons. The British say this is in response to Russian aggression after the, quote, reckless Russian airstrikes hit Kyiv's Cabinet and Ministers building and those drone incursions. But there's more on sanctions from Adélie a little while later. Now then, on the ground in Ukraine, again, not an awful lot. The same report as I've been saying for months now. Not a lot of movement. There was some Russian movement to the west of the area where Donetsk and Zaporizhia Oblast borders meet, but not a lot really. I mention it because when I say there's been no move, I get pedants and trolls, and not always mutually exclusive, saying, "Oh, you said there's no movement." Well, I can confirm they've moved 200 metres. Anyway, so a little bit of movement west. Yesterday, 40 drones fired by Russia at Ukraine, 33 brought down, but the other 7 did get through. 6 people were killed across the country, mostly in Sumy in the north of the country. In Russia last night, there was said to be a mass wave of Ukrainian drones hitting various parts of the country. Ukrainian drones hit a vessel in the port of Primorsk inside Russia. It started a fire there. Now, Russian state media said that air defense forces had shot down at least 30 Ukrainian drones and said that the open fire on a vessel had been extinguished in the port of Primorsk. I think that means that there was a fire on the vessel, not that they opened fire on the vessel. You never really know, to be honest. They said there's no threat of flooding or spillage of oil products. And if they believe that, then I've got a car to sell them. Now, Ombre Intelligence, the global maritime risk management firm, say that this was the first known drone strike on the port of Primorsk. Concurrently, there was a wider UAV attack just to the south in the Ust-Luga region. So that bit of the Baltic Sea. So we've got the port of Primorsk, and it runs sort of southeast for 60 or 70 other Ks into St. Petersburg, and then comes around to the south and heads west again. So it's right in the sort of top corner of the Baltic Sea. So you've got Primorsk north and Ust-Luga about 50 Ks south across the sea, but actually it's very close because there's not a lot of water left there. So in the same attack, we think the Ust-Luga port terminal was hit about 50 Ks south. Now, a source in the SBU, the Security Service of Ukraine, speaking to the Kyiv Independent, said that Primorsk to the north serves as a key hub for Russia's Shadow Fleet. And the source said that after the drone strike, numerous fires had broken out amongst the vessels and a pumping station there, forcing the suspension of oil shipments. This source said that SBU drones had also hit 3 oil pumping stations, part of the pipeline funneling crude down to that Ust-Luga terminal, as I said, 50 Ks to the south. So Russian MOD said that across the country, 221 Ukrainian drones were brought down. The residents in Leningrad Oblast, which are probably slightly more realistic to watch on the Telegram channels, they said that the attack in that region was one of the most massive strikes on the region since the start of the full-scale war. As Russia, or in the form of regional governor Alexander Drozhenko, said 30 drones have been brought down in Leningrad Oblast, but the drone threat in the region caused St. Petersburg's Volkovo airport to shut down briefly. Now, just point you to an interesting story that Memphis Barker, our senior foreign correspondent, has got in today's paper. We will put the link in the episode notes. He says that Donald Trump's campaign of what's called revenge against CIA officials is blinding the US to the threat posed by Russia. A number of former intelligence officers have warned, speaking to Memphis. So the president's administration has publicly revoked the security clearances of dozens of officials, many of whom contributed to the 2017 assessment that Russia had interfered in the presidential election on Mr. Trump's behalf. Memphis goes on, the decision to publish a list of 37 current and former intelligence professionals who had allegedly betrayed their oath to the Constitution by weaponizing intelligence, in the words of the administration, for partisan goals, has left a number of people fearful and looking over their shoulders, we are told. Now, this purge of intelligence officials means that those who remain are more likely to water down reports on Russia, Memphis says, or request transfers to less politically sensitive subjects, or possibly avoid risky operations inside Moscow or elsewhere. These are 4 former intelligence officers speaking to The Telegraph. We're told that inside the CIA's headquarters in Langley in Virginia, an atmosphere of distrust and caution has taken root, and The Telegraph hears that hundreds of officers have resigned or taken early retirement following DOGE, that's the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk's brainchild. DOGE's offer to buy out the contracts for federal workers. I'm told that they're being offered packages to take them up to the end of the year, and then they're off. We are told around a third of the 300-strong workforce of the State Department's intelligence agency, the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, have also left the government. We'll put a link, as I said, in the episode notes. But it does chime with kind of the stuff I've been hearing from various people in the security ecosystem in the US at the moment. I hear a lot of people are leaving, particularly with these Doge buyouts. But the people that are going are the older cohort, the kind of last wave, if you like, of the Cold War warriors, those with under 10 years left to go for their careers, that kind of thing. Now, you might say, well, that's okay, we'll get new blood in, it's opportunity for promotion, etc., etc. But just think about the loss of experience, especially as state-on-state confrontation, which these kind of individuals would have cut their teeth on back in the day. State-on-state confrontation is back in vogue, if not in dogue. I'm told there's a lot of drift around the whole ecosystem. I hear from numerous people that Pete Hegseth is an absent Secretary of State. He's there for the photo ops, doing pull-ups and all that kind of stuff, front of house kind of work. But I hear that it's Elbridge Colby who's effectively in day-to-day charge, the Undersecretary of War for Policy. It used to be Undersecretary of Defence, but it's apparently gives more focus, we are told, if you call it the Department of War. Anyway, in that role, he is the principal advisor to Pete Hegseth on defence and foreign policy matters, but I'm told he's kind of driving things with, well, the inference was there's less oversight with Mr. Colby. Anyway, the overall picture painted to me from a number of areas I'm hearing is one of pure chaos in the Pentagon and around the wider kind of defence and security ecosystem. And I just can't see how that is good news, even in the name of efficiency. And someone wants to put a figure on that efficiency, let's do so. But I can't see how that is a good thing to happen. Anyway, that's us up to date, Adélie.
Thanks, Dom. So I'm also going to continue talking about the fallout from the drone incursion into the Polish airspace earlier this week, mostly focusing on sanctions. So Zelensky said that the EU's best response would be a powerful 19th sanctions package. That's something that has been in the works already since last month. It was announced by the EU's Kaja Kallas in August. The priorities for these sanctions include Russia's banking sector, banks in third countries that continue trading with Russia, and the shadow fleet infrastructure that funds Russia's war budget. Additional measures that are also being put under consideration would include a ban on exports of goods and chemicals used in Russia's military industry, as well as trade restrictions on foreign suppliers, including Chinese companies, and visa restrictions on ports handling sanctioned shadow vessels. For the first time, the EU is reportedly considering sanctions against Kazakhstan to block the supply of certain materials used in Russian weapons production. Politico reports that there was a flurry of diplomatic visits over the past week where top officials on both sides of the Atlantic were meeting to discuss new financial restrictions and plans to cut off the flow of Russian oil and gas. That would be a separate thing from the 19th sanctions package coming from the EU. There was also a high-level EU technical team that was dispatched to Washington to work on the details of this other round of proposals. The general feeling is that now that Trump seems to have realized that Putin does not want to end the war in Ukraine and that he will not show up to meet Zelensky despite numerous requests from the Ukrainian counterpart, he needs to be forced to the negotiation table. But how do you make that happen? The negotiators say privately that the most effective action that needs to be taken is a partnership with the Americans. But how do you reconcile the two approaches? The Trump administration, on the one hand, prefers to use trade tools like tariffs to drain the Kremlin's war chest, while the EU pushes for more formal sanctions on the businesses and financial institutions that deal with Moscow. The EU president told EU officials this week that he wanted to impose a 100% tariff on India and China for buying Russian energy, provided that Brussels would follow suit. But that's an economic and political impossibility for the EU because that's going against the EU's core principle, especially after the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen reiterated her opposition to tariffs. She insisted that tariffs are taxes on domestic consumers. At the same time, Europe is also very close to a major trade deal with Russia, and Politico describes it as diplomatic self-harm. The US president has also called on Europe to stop buying Russian fossil fuels. That goes hand in hand with obvious economic advantages and opportunity for the US, the Energy Secretary Chris Wright landed in Brussels for meetings on Thursday, where he hoped to cement the details of an agreement between Trump and von der Leyen for the EU bloc to buy an additional $750 billion worth of American gas, oil and nuclear fuel. At the end of the press conference, his EU counterpart, the Energy Commissioner Dan Jorgensen, said that he intended to accelerate the bloc's commitment to end all imports on Russian natural gas by the end of 2027. That's a long way away. Other news from the end of this week, a lot of important people are doing a lot of important business in Kyiv. Yesterday, Keith Kellogg, the special envoy from the US to Russia and Ukraine, did a surprise visit to Kyiv where he met Zelensky. They discussed additional weapons for Ukraine and economic pressure on Russia. Part of the conversations targeted expanding the Pearl initiative to finance the production and procurement of Patriot systems, as well as bilateral agreements on drones and weapons that Ukraine had proposed to the US. So just a reminder that the Pearl initiative is a system by which the European countries would purchase American arms, including Patriots, and give them to Ukraine. And that comes through NATO's prioritized Ukraine requirement list, hence Pearl mechanism. And that coordinates funding for Kyiv's most urgent battlefield needs. The formal outcomes of the conversation with Kellogg were not immediately clear, but Zelensky requested again to meet with Putin, telling Kellogg that a trilateral format of negotiations at the leaders' level would be the most effective. Another one of these important visits is Finnish President Alexander Stubb, who arrived in the Ukrainian capital yesterday as well to discuss security cooperation and sanctions against Russia. No great headlines have come out of the meeting, yet at least. Zelensky posted on social media that they had a substantive discussion on a wide range of issues. So you can't be more vague than that, really. Interestingly, in the press conference coming out of that meeting with Finnish President Stubb, is that Zelensky compared the drone incursion in Poland to what had happened in Crimea. He said the scariest thing is that this attack resembles Crimea psychologically. Right now, it's a technological war. It's not just about people in green uniforms. Today, the same role in Polish territory was exposed by Russian drones. The most dangerous thing is when, for example, the US, as it was in Crimea, or some other partners, send signals that the main thing is not to provoke war. Yvette Cooper, who became the UK's new Foreign Secretary after last week's reshuffle, visited Kyiv yesterday. It was her first trip as Foreign Secretary. She announced £142 million of UK aid in order to support Ukraine through the winter and into the next year. £100 million will provide support to help civilians in frontline communities. This will include repairing critical water and heating systems in order to support the livelihoods and the jobs and to strengthen Ukrainian resilience. Another £42 million will help carry out vital repairs to the electricity transmission network and put in place critical protection for gas and power infrastructure. The UK government has also implemented 100 new sanctions designed to hit Russia's revenues and military supplies. That includes the Shadow Fleet, but also electronics companies. These sanctions were imposed on 70 more ships and on 30 entities and individuals supporting Russia's war machine. Sanctions have also been imposed on a company based in China whose co-owners are Russian and on another company based in Turkey and its chief executive, the Azerbaijani national Shanlik Shukurov. And finally, the last important visit of the end of this week is our very own Prince Harry, who arrived in Ukraine yesterday. He was invited by Olga Rudneva. She's the founder and chief executive of the Superhumans Trauma Center in Ukraine. He came with a team from his Invictus Game Foundation. It was set up by the Duke of Sussex in 2014 for wounded veterans to compete in sports events. And they will unveil new initiatives to support the rehabilitation of the wounded. Just to give you an idea of the scale, and we'll talk more about this on the podcast very soon, the number of Ukrainians who've developed a disability since the war started has reached 300,000. That's according to a report published by the European Disability Forum. And the estimated numbers of Ukrainian amputees, they vary quite a lot, but the commonly accepted median figure is around 40,000. Prince Harry said that he remembered the reception of Ukraine's team that it received at the Games in The Hague 2 years ago, saying it was remarkable. Every one of the participants had a journey to get to those games, but nobody from any of the other competing nations was going back to war. And that's it for the diplomatic updates for today. Dom, I hear you were on the same squadron from Prince Harry. Do you have any anecdotes or anything you want to share with us?
Sadly not. I did serve at 662 Squadron, Army Air Corps, as did Prince Harry. We were just about 10 years apart. So I went back a few times and bumped into various chums, but no, he and I never actually crossed paths. So no great insights to Prince Harry while he was serving. The one thing I would say, though, is that a lot of people said, he was only allowed to fly helicopters just as he was royal and all the rest of it. It's blooming expensive flying helicopters. If you cannot fly them properly, there's no room for passengers, basically. Well, I mean, literally, in an Apache, there's no room for passengers. So, as far as I heard, and I do believe the people who were telling me this, Prince Harry was a perfectly good pilot and deserved his place in the cockpit. But I never flew with the chap, so I don't know. Obviously not as good as me, but he was a pilot, so, cut above everyone else.
He made it there at least. No royal gossip on this Friday's episode of the pod, sadly. Going to our final thoughts, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes on the new French Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, because he was formerly Minister of the Armed Forces and Defence. So just a little recap on the French domestic scene. The French government fell earlier this week after an overwhelming vote of no confidence from the Parliament, mostly over the budget. Former Prime Minister now, François Bayrou, resigned, and shortly after, Sébastien Lecornu was named by Macron. We yet have to find out what his government is going to look like. He's not offered one yet when we record this podcast. So what do we need to know about Lecornu for our purposes here? Well, he's a bit of a political whiz kid. He was a parliamentary aide at the age of 19. Crucially, he's a long-time Macron follower. He's been minister for 8 years, first on overseas territories, and then defence minister since 2022. So since the beginning of the invasion. I'll come back to that. Domestically, I'll just spend a couple of seconds on this. I think it's important. He's known as someone who has Macron's ear. He's also known as someone who's open lines of communication between the Élysée and the far right. It came out last summer that he'd had secret dinners with Marine Le Pen and organised secret meetings, brokering meetings with the Élysée Palace and the far right leader. He's got the least hostility coming from the far right. And considering the layout of the French Parliament, it may very well be why he was nominated Prime Minister. However, he was not particularly welcomed by Marine Le Pen and party leader Jordan Bardella and other far-right MPs who mocked that Macron didn't change a losing team and that his budget would have to be blessed by the far-right, otherwise it would never make it through Parliament. And someone else said that, he wouldn't last 3 months just like any of the others. So no great sign of political stability on the horizon in France. But back to defence and the war in Ukraine. Sébastien Lecornu is known for having accelerated investment in the armed forces and in defence generally. He passed the military spending law, or Loi de Programmation Militaire, for 2024-2030 with a very strong majority. That doubled the armed forces budget compared to 2017 and brought the defence budget to 430 billion euros. That is with the aim to bring the French armed forces to be ready for a high-intensity conflict. One of the examples of how this has increased France's military capacity is that in 2022, France was only able to produce 25,000 shells, and by the end of this year, 2025, should be able to produce 100,000. The French budget, which is being discussed right now in Parliament, and over which the Bayrou government crumbled, is a conversation that frankly is as difficult as the UK budget conversations happening here on the other side of the channel. What was announced over the summer are cuts of 44 billion euros, none of which apply to the defence budget. I'm sure Lecornu had a strong hand in that. And we're looking towards an added 6.5 billion euros for the years 2026-2027. Now, his legacy has been criticised, as far as I've seen in France, over France's operations in Africa, but I'm not going to go into details here, although I thought it was worth mentioning. Now that he's become Prime Minister, of course, he'll be a lot more focused on domestic issues and especially solving the financial crisis in France. So it'll be very interesting to see who he nominates within his government and to see whether that's going to change the dynamics and whether he's going to still want to have a hand into anything having to do with Ukraine and anything having to do with defense. And that's it for me. That was my very long final thought on French politics. Dom?
I'm just looking at some news coming out of the BBC. So the BBC says that, this is Hugh Schofield, their Paris correspondent, saying that French police suspect that people who put pigs' heads outside Paris mosques on Monday night were acting under orders from a foreign intelligence service, probably Russian. Now, these pigs' heads were found on Tuesday morning outside 9 mosques in central Paris and surrounding suburbs. It prompted a wave of outrage and condemnation, the BBC say. Investigators now say the 2 people involved drove a Serb-registered car, used a Croatian mobile telephone and crossed into Belgium a few hours later. So police investigating this told media that they were approached by a Normandy farmer who said he had sold about 10 pigs' heads to 2 men driving a Serbian-registered car. That same car seen in CCTV footage in eastern Paris on Monday evening and again near some of the mosques. Police are trying to trace the car and the phone.
Well, I'm not surprised about that. There have been numerous acts of violence towards minority communities, whether that's Muslim or Jews, over the last few years, all with some sort of Russian underhand playing a part in that. And I'd be very happy to do a bit more of a dive into this for a future episode of the pod, and how Russia is trying to feed fuel to the fire of France's domestic tensions within different communities. So I'm really not surprised. And I imagine that butcher would have been surprised to receive an order for 9 pig's head, considering it's not
10,
January.
apparently.
10.
I mean, what's 1 pig's head between friends? But no, the French say that Russia and Iran have both been named by French intelligence as countries liable to provoke dissension in France through dirty tricks. So that's just come out by the BBC, colleagues over there. Interesting, yeah, we should keep an eye on that. But it does look like they're an attempt to fan the flames, shall we say.
Today we're publishing the second half of the interviews David and I did on Naboo in spring 2024. In Monday's episode, which we'll link to in the show notes, you heard us tour the headquarters of the anti-corruption body in Kyiv and interview its director and deputy director. Today we're hearing 2 interviews with experts who've long been at the forefront of Ukraine's battle against corruption, albeit in different capacities and with, perhaps, a more critical lens. Oleg Sukhov, that you'll hear first, is an investigative journalist from the Kyiv Independent. Later, you'll hear from Daria Kaleniuk, the executive director of the Anti-Corruption Action Centre in Kyiv. And, just like in Monday's episode, we've kept the offcuts of these interviews so that you can hear more of David.
Hi, Oleg, can you hear me?
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes, perfect. That's great.
You don't need the video, right?
No, I kept mine on so you can see me, basically.
Okay.
So you're welcome to turn it on or turn it off. It's all good. I don't mind.
Okay, sure.
Very nice to meet you. I'm David. I'm from The Telegraph, and I've been doing coverage of Ukraine for the war for the past 2 and a bit years. We're basically creating a series of mid-length documentaries on a number of subjects, and one of the things we wanted to look at was the fight against corruption, and specifically Naboo. So we went to Naboo's headquarters. They showed us around. We interviewed them. That was very interesting. And we want to get on tape, essentially, a broader understanding of, who they are, what they do, perceptions of them, scandals, that kind of thing. And I spoke to Asami, obviously who you know, and she said you'd be perfect for this and would be able to sort of guide us through. So you'd be one of the expert voices in this documentary, basically. Because basically we did this thing and they showed us around and we were like, that's really impressive. Then thought, hang on, hang on a second. To what extent is this, it's propaganda? How true is this? How do we know? I mean,
is it going to be focused on the Naboo specifically, or on law enforcement in general?
I say focused on Naboo, but I think a broader understanding of corruption and law enforcement is useful to put it into context. We went in February, March, and we were very impressed. Should we have been? What should we have noticed that we didn't? That kind of thing. So that's the idea basically. And in terms of production, we aim to have this out in the next few weeks, I think, so I can keep in touch with you and obviously let you know when it's published.
Okay.
How does that sound?
It's all right.
Brilliant. All right. Okay. Oleg, thank you so much for your time. Would you start just by introducing yourself and your work?
So I'm Oleg Sukhov. I'm a reporter at the Kyiv Independent, basically one of the largest English language newspapers in Ukraine. Well, one of the 2. I'm focused on law enforcement, the rule of law, reforms, but also Russia and currently the US elections.
Can we talk about NABU? Why was it set up, and what was the political environment in Ukraine when it was set up?
The NABU was set up in 2015 after the Euromaidan revolution, which overthrew Viktor Yanukovych, who was a pro-Russian president. The corruption of Yanukovych's administration was notorious. Ukraine has historically been one of the most corrupt countries in Europe, but under Yanukovych, this corruption was very blatant. It was kind of in your face. And when Ukraine became more Western-oriented after the Euromaidan revolution, when it distanced itself from Russia, the West demanded some reforms from Ukraine, including anti-corruption reforms, rule of law reforms. And as a result, one of the agencies that was set up as part of those reforms was the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, or NABU. The idea was, traditional law enforcement agencies like the police, the SBU, the Prosecutor General's office were corrupt themselves, unreformed. So the idea was to create kind of an island of reform in this corrupt sea.
That's a really great introduction, Oleg. Could you talk to us then? I mean, it's fascinating, as you say, it's this island in a sea of corruption. What problems did NABU face at the beginning in its first few years? How did it work? Was it successful?
It has always been under attack from top politicians, from the presidential administration, including both the Poroshenko administration and the Zelensky administration. So the idea was to make it independent from the president and from the executive branch and even from the prosecutor general, and as a result to enable it to prosecute incumbent top officials. As a result, there were many attempts to put pressure on the NABU and to establish political control over it. So that was one of the main problems. Well, another problem was more technical, it was a lack of resources, a lack of staff, basically a lack of authority or powers to, investigate, a lack of jurisdiction. Obviously, the officials, top officials and the presidential administration never wanted the NABU to become too powerful and to prosecute, to investigate top officials of the presidential administration or the cabinet. And as a result, there were always efforts to kind of restrict its powers, restrict its resources. In terms of political independence, the NABU has historically been more autonomous than other law enforcement agencies, but not completely. I would say that from the very beginning, some attempts to influence the NABU were successful, and there were meetings between the NABU leadership and Poroshenko, both official and informal, or Poroshenko's people, the same under Zelensky. So the NABU has always been playing this kind of game. It was trying to show to the West and to Western embassies that it was independent and effective, but it was also trying to show to Ukraine's political leadership that it was not a threat to them. And as a result, it was not completely independent, which I think is demonstrated by this recent scandal about which we were going to speak.
Absolutely. Well, before we speak about that, could you just clear up something for us? Who does it report to exactly then? Who's the boss of the NABU if they're constantly trying to balance the influence from different government departments in the presidential office?
Well, technically, the boss of the NABU is the head of the NABU, but the NABU is an investigating agency. All investigators in Ukraine, they are subordinated to prosecutors, so they can investigate, but they cannot prosecute. As a result, the NABU is overseen and supervised by the so-called Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, or SAPO. This SAPO is headed by the Chief Anti-Corruption Prosecutor, who is at the same time a Deputy Prosecutor General. In some ways, this Chief Anti-Corruption Prosecutor is subordinated to the Prosecutor General. In other ways, he's supposed to be kind of independent. So there have always been efforts to make him, by the West and by Ukraine's civil society, to make the chief anti-corruption prosecutor and the chief of the NABU independent, but they are not independent de facto, right? And they, even legally, the chief anti-corruption prosecutor does not have full independence, but he has more autonomy than other deputy prosecutor generals.
Oleg, could you talk to us a little bit then about the state of corruption in Ukraine and the work of NABU through the full-scale invasion? How is the kind of issues and problems you're looking at changed over the past 2 years, and how have NABU reacted to that?
Basically, I don't see like a lot of change in terms of the state of Ukraine's corruption during the full-scale invasion. I have no evidence to claim either that Ukraine has become more corrupt or less corrupt. Although there are factors that make corruption in some cases more probable, and they basically make some top officials less responsible to the public because of the invasion, because of the martial law. First, the war can always be used as an excuse, sort of can always say that since there is a war going on, so it's the main priority and the main focus, and we should not focus like on corruption and the rule of law. That's kind of secondary. First we should defeat Russia. There's a lot of people who claim that this should be the case. And also, I would say that the authorities have become more secretive, less accountable in some ways, and that makes corruption more possible, I would say. Although I have no evidence to claim that there is now more corruption, but I'm pretty sure it's not less than before the invasion. After the invasion began, a new head of the NABU was appointed, Semen Krivonos. I would say that both the previous head of the NABU, Sitnik, and the current head, Krivonos, they face some criticism, either for example, failing to investigate some presidential allies or some other big corruption cases, or for being not independent enough, Although these problems kind of intensified, I would say, under the current leadership, under Krivonos, because there is now like a major conflict between Krivonos and Ukraine civil society, anti-corruption activists, which was unthinkable under Sitnik. So now the deputy head of the NABU even filed a lawsuit against Ukraine's top anti-corruption activist Shabunin, which says a lot about this whole bizarre situation, because the NABU and anti-corruption activists are supposed to kind of work together, and it's always a bad sign if the NABU has a conflict with them.
As well as scandal through the full-scale invasion, they've also brought to light some important scandals during the last 2 years. Maybe it'd be good to talk a little bit about some of their successes as well. I mean, there's that aspect of it, and then the second aspect is when we were there, they showed us around the various offices of hardworking lawyers and investigators and so on, and from what we saw, of course we were aware it was a tour for the media. They seemed hardworking, very driven, and they could point to some success. I don't know, I'd be interested in your reaction to us walking away from that building being quite impressed. What do you make of that?
Well, yeah, it's hard to see like some genuine success just based on the appearance of their offices. It would take more than that, I think. But I mean, to be objective, there have been successes both under Sitnik and under Krivonos. One of the main successes, when the NABU was created, a lot of people who were not corrupt, who had integrity, who actually were genuinely willing to fight corruption, they were joining the NABU as just investigators. I mean, I'm pretty sure such people remain there now. So these people were, in a sense, an island of integrity in this corrupt sea. And that's good. Although I wouldn't overestimate this factor, because there are different people at the NABU. Not all of them have integrity. There have been efforts to control and to crack down on people with integrity. One of the biggest cases was against the head of the Supreme Court, a former deputy chief of staff for Zelensky. So he was like a top member of the Zelensky administration. He's also been charged in a corruption case. Yeah, I mean, to be objective, I can say that definitely these people are not just like petty officials, so they are big fish. In a sense, it is an achievement, it is a success. But on the other hand, I think it is a limited success because the NABU should be politically neutral, right? It should not attack only one camp and leave the other one alone. Top people at the president's office, for example, which has been accused of being involved in corruption schemes, they have impunity. They have built sort of a wall around them, and it's impossible to break it, and they're not being properly investigated. I mean, Smirnov from the president's office is sort of an exception, but on the other hand, he was charged only after he resigned from the president's office, and he had some conflicts with other people. One problem is that the NABU has limited authority to actually investigate the president's office. And the president's office, technically, people from the president's office, in most cases, they cannot even be investigated by the NABU under the law. I wouldn't say like most cases, but in many cases. The NABU, in a lot of cases, lacks jurisdiction to go after them.
Sorry, please.
Yeah. And on the other hand, apart from jurisdiction, I think that the NABU also lacks political will to go after people from the president's office and from like top presidential allies in general, because they're afraid that if they go after them, the NABU will be destroyed and, Krivonos will be fired. In that sense, the success of the NABU is limited just because they're going after mostly people who are not part of the incumbent administration. I mean, top people of the incumbent administration. They're going after like some petty MPs, petty officials, that's true. But very rarely do they go after like top people at the incumbent administration.
From what you're saying, Oleg, from your position as investigating these things and writing about corruption, writing about the scene, do you see the NABU as a good thing with some bad limitations and, as you said, like some control? Or would it be better if they didn't exist? I mean, where do you fall on how useful this is and how good this is?
I've encountered both opinions. The second opinion is actually that even though they are, doing some good stuff, but they are mostly acting as a facade. That's what some people believe, that even though they are going after some like corrupt, like even top corrupt officials, usually it's not a big threat to any incumbent administration, but it creates good PR for them because they can always say, to Western embassies that we have this super independent anti-corruption agency, which is going after anyone without any political bias. So in a sense, I think this opinion is partially true because the NABU is definitely better than other law enforcement agencies, the SAPO and the NABUs. But there has not been any serious effort by the Ukrainian authorities to make them into some really independent and powerful force. So they are sort of a facade. So I'm not saying that they had no achievements. They have had achievements. But on the other hand, in some ways, they are a facade.
What's your sense of public opinion around issues of corruption and law enforcement and NABU? If there was in the future an attempt to shut it down, as you said they're worried about, what would the reaction be?
So if we're talking about the general public, I haven't checked the polls about it recently, but my impression is that the general public generally does not care about this stuff. They care about the economy, they care about the war, about some more practical, more pragmatic stuff. For them, anti-corruption infrastructure is not a big deal, I think. Actually, a lot of people in this sort of general public think that, the NABU and SAPO, if they even know that they exist, that they are some sort of political game, not something genuine. And, I think this opinion is partially correct. But if you're talking about like civil society, anti-corruption activists and experts, Western governments, for them it is a big deal. For them, if the NABU is destroyed, it will create a major scandal in the West. It will create a major scandal in Ukraine's civil society, definitely.
Oleg, is there anything we haven't spoken about that you think is important, especially thinking of international listeners from the UK, the US, who obviously don't have, sort of your depth of knowledge and familiarity and understanding of what's happening. Is there anything we haven't spoken about you think they should know?
Well, I think just an important issue that I wanted to raise is that the NABU's leadership should be more kind of accountable. And in this leak scandal will show whether it should be replaced if the reaction to the leak scandal continues like this. And now the reaction is basically zero from the NABU. It will be necessary to actually replace the current leadership of the NABU to relaunch this agency. The way it was done with the SAPO under Nazar Kholodnitsky, who was actually who was first praised as an anti-corruption prosecutor, but then there was also a leak scandal linked to Kholodnitsky, and as a result, he became one of the most notorious kind of top officials in Ukraine. He resigned. I don't remember if he resigned like ahead of schedule, but when he resigned, no one actually believed that he was like a genuine anti-corruption crusader. And the same might happen to the current NABU leadership. And I also think that this whole idea of creating a facade, an island in this corrupt sea, is a bit dubious because instead of creating an island, Ukraine should reform the whole sea, right? The NABU should definitely be enabled to go after, officials from the president's office. It should be given all the necessary powers, all the necessary authority. In general, its resources and its authority should be increased, and its independence should be guaranteed and also increased. And I think this is what the West should definitely push for.
Oleg, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you too.
That's brilliant. Yeah, we've got that. Thank you so much. That was really excellent. And thank you for your time. I know it's in the evening for you, so yeah, it means a lot to us. And I'll let you know when it's going out and everything. I liked what you said when you laughed and said, "Well, I wouldn't just be impressed by their buildings." You're like, you're right, because we were. Then we left and we were like, "Hang on." Very silly, but yeah, thank you so much. That was brilliant.
And now, Daria Kaleniuk from the Anti-Corruption Action Center, an activist group that helped set up NABU and SAPO after the Revolution of Dignity in 2014. She looks back on 10 years of anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine.
Well, Daria, thank you so much for your time. Would you start just by introducing yourself and your work?
My name is Daria Kaleniuk. I'm executive director of Anti-Corruption Action Center. This is Ukrainian civil society organization which works since 2012 on tackling grand political corruption in Ukraine.
And when you say a civil society organization, what do you mean by that exactly?
I mean that we are not governmental organization. We are not funded by government. We receive resources from different international technical assistance projects, some private donors, citizens of Ukraine. It allows us to be independent, disregarding who is in government or in power in Ukraine or anywhere else. And it allows us to push for really complicated reforms, which are challenging status quo and challenging personal interests of very influential people, including people like oligarchs.
Could you talk about when your organization started in 2012, what was the scene of corruption in Ukraine then, and how has that changed over the past sort of 10, 14 years?
Well, in 2012, there was a completely different landscape in Ukraine, political situation and also freedoms which people had. In 2012, there was still a pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was supported by Vladimir Putin, and pro-Russian political parties which were funded partially by Russia. President Yanukovych treated the country as the source for his self-enrichment and enrichment for his clan, his family members, but also his close associates. There was a situation close to the captured state, basically state institutions, state natural resources, political institutions being controlled by a very limited amount of people. That was not a A good story for Ukrainians. Ukrainians didn't like that, and absolute majority of Ukrainians wanted, even that time, fight with corruption, justice. We were clear back in 2012, our future is with the EU and NATO. And when in 2013, President Yanukovych refused to sign association agreement with the EU, suddenly the young people of Ukraine gathered in the downtown in Kyiv to protest against that decision. In a couple of days, Yanukovych used special police forces to dismantle that rally, that peaceful rally. So basically 17 years old, 18 years old students were beaten in the middle of the night. That caused huge outcry from hundreds, thousands, and millions of Ukrainians. And the next day in downtown Kyiv, there were not just 1,000 of people, but there was 1 million of people, which demanded resignation of President Yanukovych. This is how we have started. But in 2012, law enforcement agencies didn't react on the cases of corruption reported by journalists. But the good thing was that investigative journalists in Ukraine were very good in producing information materials and investigations about grand corruption, supported by documents, by other evidence. And as a lawyer myself, I was actually wondering why law enforcement agencies don't react. It's enough to start the case. Then we gathered the group of volunteers, of lawyers, and decided, okay, we will collect this evidence and translate investigative journalist texts into the legal text and submit it with partnership with some members of parliament. There were 3 very good members of parliament at that time, to law enforcement agencies, requesting them to react. Through that kind of communication, we were able to stop some very bad public procurement contracts, which helped to save millions of dollars in Ukrainian budget, even back in 2012. But that kind of correspondence also helps us to understand what works well and what doesn't work in the system of judiciary and law enforcement and controlling agencies in Ukraine. So we understood what is in charge of what, and what is fixable quickly, what is not fixable quickly. By the moment when in February 2014, Viktor Yanukovych ran away, the revolution of dignity succeeded, there was a window of opportunity created to push for the proper reforms, quick changes which could deliver quick results. Our knowledge of what works, what doesn't work, what is fixable, what is not fixable, helped us to design the anti-corruption architecture in Ukraine. So this is how we actually agreed on the design of our anti-corruption infrastructure.
Daria, thank you so much for talking me through all of that. What do you think the limitations of a group like NABU are in the way that they've been set up, and the limitations in terms of, as you said, like they're not a prosecuting agency, they're an investigating agency. So there's only so much they can do before they have to hand off to the next people along. Yeah, I'd be interested in your broad thoughts on like their limitations and whether that's by design or pressure.
NABU has very narrow jurisdiction, which is protected by the separate law. And they have to focus on senior officials and on cases engaging huge amounts of money linked to the state budget. It is by Ukrainian constitution that prosecutors have to be separate. And they work with NABU detectives very closely because prosecutors can direct the investigation in the proper way. They have to approve different investigative steps like searches, arrests, access to some private data, prepare and approve documents for the court, even during the pre-trial investigation. During the trials, prosecutors, not detectives, actually present all the evidence. In the history of NABU and SAPO and High Anti-Corruption Court, we faced different approaches to attack them. So not everybody in Ukraine likes them. And outside of Ukraine as well, by the way. There were attempts through changes to the legislation to destroy their guarantees of independence. And by guarantees of independence, I mean that it is impossible, according to the law, to fire a NABU director based on the political grounds. Also, there is very detailed, precise mechanism of how you are selecting NABU director. There is a very comprehensive selection commission, which is composed of independent international experts who are guarding the process and prevent political interference into the selection procedure. And even with this process, there are always attempts to interfere. But our team, we are, the air alert. Can you hear it, or we
That's
can?
that. Yeah, we can carry on. That's fine. That's fine.
Sorry, just one case. Let's wait until this air alert will stop.
Sure.
I will check. What's the reason for air alert. It's MiG-31.
Oh,
usually
just
it's
flying.
not that. It's not that dangerous. When did I finish what I was talking about? Could you please remind me?
The sort of political people trying to interfere with the appointment process of an Abu director.
Yeah. Sorry, this array continues.
No worries. It's fine.
I'm not sure whether you hear it through the air.
I can hear it. Yeah,
through my AirPods.
Yeah. The last time I was in Ukraine, I was very lucky. There weren't many at all. And then on the last night, it was all night. Just when I had to get like a 5 a.m. bus out to Poland.
Yeah, just the location where we are. It's very close to this air alert source, and it's extremely noisy.
Does it not go off after a few minutes? I thought it usually did. Is it just because you're really close?
It will go off.
Yeah. Where are you based in Kiev?
Actually, we are in downtown, close to Hreshatyk.
Nice. Okay.
And close to the presidential administration.
Nice. Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, and this air raid is really nearby. Why it's so long? Okay, we heard you. Good. So it's over.
Nice.
Okay, I've focused on the guarantees of independence of NABU, and one of the guarantees is the way how the NABU director is selected. As Anti-Corruption Action Center, we observe every selection procedure, and we are monitoring the candidates who apply for the NABU director. We analyze their backgrounds based on the publicly available information. We are watching all the interviews of candidates, and this is kind of civil society oversight is additional guarantee of the independence. They've proven to be quite effective. So, yes, there were attempts to influence NABU, and they will probably be, as they are focusing on top officials, senior political leaders. They will always create some political risks for important political players. However, these guarantees of independence, which are embedded in the law, and constant oversight and watchdog activity of civil society is the way how to protect NABU and ensure that we have institution which works quite independent. And the same goes to the SAPO, Special Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office, and High Anti-Corruption Court. And I'm not saying that there are no mistakes and no problems in their work. From time to time, there are different crises happening inside these institutions, like Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor, which was behaving in a wrong way and was stalling some of the investigations. Then we've got a new anti-corruption prosecutor selected, who's a really good one, adheres to the best principles of independence. But we've got the new NABU director, who is kind of less resistant to the pressures which the previous one. Every institution has its growth crises, and almost 10 years of work, NABU had a few growth crises, but the fact is that the institution works, it's operational, and it delivers the results. But it also sends the signal to other law enforcement agencies in Ukraine that you can do things differently. There can be honest, decent prosecutors, investigators.
Daria, you spoke a little bit about the current director of NABU. What can you tell us about him? What are your thoughts?
His name is Semen Krivonos. He is the guy who didn't have prosecutorial or investigative experience, so this is his weakness. However, in his previous capacities, he worked for the government in Odessa regional administration, also in the state architecture. He was not the best and the strongest candidate to this position, but he was selected through the really competitive procedure. For the first year of his tenure, he was still learning a lot. What is investigation, prosecution, how to maintain independence. The internal crisis which NABU has now is caused by, I think, by this lack of investigative and prosecutorial experience of Semen. But from conversations with him and from some moves with him, I see that he is committed to safeguard the independence of NABU. So the legacy which he has received from the predecessor is quite strong. And he needs to follow the high standards bar which were set up by previous director of NABU, Artem Sitnik. And we expect that this internal crisis, which again, they are happening from time to time as they are happening in any institution. But I expect that it will be resolved quite soon. And I have hopes that NABU director will really establish himself as independent professional who safeguards high principles of professionalism, integrity, and independence of NABU and its personnel.
Just coming to the end now, looking back over the past 9 years, coming up to 10 years of NABU's existence, what do you think are their biggest successes?
Well, first of all, they broke this fear of investigating and prosecuting untouchable people. They have hundreds of cases with real convictions results. So people were thrown to the jail, and these are judges, prosecutors. They have successes in confiscating of significant amounts of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, for our law enforcement to show not only that you can throw a person to the jail, but you can return some money into the budget through confiscation of illegally gotten funds. The case against one of the leaders in security service of Ukraine during the wartime is important. So it is not the indication of corruption of Ukraine. It's indication of the actually properly functioning immune system of Ukraine. When we are able, even during the martial law and the largest genocidal war with Russia, clean up our system and identify rotten people and punish them, that is the projection of strength. It would be worse if there were no such cases. Much worse, because especially during the wartime, there is feel for more abuses of power. So far, these institutions passed this test.
Daria, is there anything we haven't spoken about that you think is important to mention?
The last message I want to say that anti-corruption without security will not work. Despite everything we were able to do in Ukraine in building our institutions, good governance, judiciary sector, if we don't have security guarantees that Russia will not continue eliminating our cities from the map and attacking our critical infrastructure, these results will not be sustainable. Also, I'm very angry when some of our allies are saying that Ukraine is not ready for entering NATO because it's too corrupt. I think it's a very hypocritical message, because in Ukraine, an absolute majority of Ukrainians treat corruption as a security threat. And we have done really a lot for these 10 years. Our decision to do these good governance reforms, Kremlin is now attacking us with a genocidal war. So therefore, it's very unjust when some leaders of some countries are saying that Ukraine is too corrupt to join NATO. I think this is the way how they want to hide their cowardice and their fear of Russia. It is important to tell the truth that leaders of some countries in NATO, in their decision not to invite Ukraine to NATO, are actually relying on their internal fear of Russia. Ukraine will fix its good governance. Ukraine will become EU member, and Ukraine wants to become NATO member, as it's the only security guarantee which can allow us to complete our good governance reforms.
Daria, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and in those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest newsletter. Each week, Dom Nicholls and Francis Durnley answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights. Plus, maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the description to this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app, and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each day on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You can find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Francis Durnley, Louisa Wells, and David Knowles.
My name is David Knowles. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.